Hello and welcome to Cahnmanns Current Events Roundtable. Our show is brought to you in part of the amazing Bluegrass Restaurant in Highland Park, where they have the most delicious food and the really great service that we enjoyed today. And I also want to thank our director, Larry Beyer, who does an amazing job for my show and other shows that are brought to you. And our crew today that are also doing an amazing job are Pam Chill, Irv Walinka, and Julian Martinson that are on camera and all the other jobs that are necessary to bring this show together. And now I want to introduce my guest today is Esteban Carbajal. I'm going to get it right one of these days. From the North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic in Highland Park. And you are a John Marshall Law student and an accredited representation for the clinic. And I want to welcome you to our show.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And today we're going to discuss immigration. And we're going to be doing immigration the right way. That means you're going to hear what really is happening on immigration and not just a talk show host thinking what immigration really is, when we really got the real McCoy here that's really going to be talking about what immigration is and how people can get here and what they have to do for documentation. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that people do not, our viewers really don't know about. And Esteban, I really want you to tell us a little bit, first of all, your job and your position in the clinic and the types of cases that you handle.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, I work at the North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic, where we provide vital pro bono legal services to those in need in the area of immigration, domestic violence, and housing. And I work in the immigration law practice. I'm a Department of Justice accredited representative that allows me to present people as an attorney, even though I'm not an attorney yet. And this program exists specifically to allow people to have access to legal representation, even though they may not be able to afford an attorney. And there's two types of accreditation. There's partial and full. And I am one of 17 in the state who has full accreditation. That means that I can represent people up into immigration court.
So this is free for people that can't afford these expensive attorneys.
Right.
You know, and so do people know that you guys exist? And is there, I know it's in Highland Park, are there other, in the other areas of Chicago, different groups that do this too, or is this the same group that does it throughout the Chicagoland area?
Well, we just have one location. There are other other pro bono organizations that offer maybe similar services than us. We started off very small in May 2015, and since then we've just expanded.
That was this year?
Unbelievable. 2015.
Oh, 2015,
right.
I'm sorry. And so how do people know that you guys are around? Is it just word of mouth, or do you go to different places around the schools, around different churches, and that to advocate, to tell people that you are existing here?
Yeah, so a lot of it is word of mouth. Also, we create partnerships with other law firms and organizations to create educational programs in the community. And we go out and do presentations for people who may be undocumented, people who may be in domestic violence situations. And that's how we've been spreading the word. And over the past couple of years, we've expanded our area that we cover. We used to just focus on Highland Park Highwood, and now we've expanded to other areas of Southern Lake County, and we even cover parts of Northern Cook County as well.
Interesting. Do you find that people, especially if they're undocumented, are they afraid to come to some of these services that it provide because they don't want, they're afraid that they're going to get turned in or something? You know, I mean, this would be a really good place to start for them. But is there a fear, do you see, amongst people that are here illegally or they're undocumented, that they're afraid to come to places that may help them?
Many times that is the situation. People might not understand that there are pro bono organizations that are, their sole mission is to help people. And they might be under the impression that we have some type of connection to immigration law enforcement and that whatever they tell us, we turn over to them. But it's not very common. It is something that we have to think about. There are sometimes we have to reassure these people that are coming maybe for the first time to tell somebody about their undocumented status.
Yeah, because I think, well, Chicago is a sanctuary city. Is being a sanctuary city, is it people feel more secure in a sanctuary city of coming forward? Or, there's pro and cons about sanctuary cities. Those feel that criminals can come in and they're protected. Other people feel a sanctuary city is good for people that are undocumented and they could have some security here. What is your point? What do you feel about that?
Well, I do think that maybe being in a sanctuary city might provide some undocumented people with reassurance that they will not be turned over to immigration authorities for something as simple as a minor traffic violation. And I think that's what the purpose of a sanctuary city was, not to protect criminals, but not to detain people who have families, who have no criminal history, and turn them over to immigration authorities.
Correct, yeah, because I think we were talking at lunch today, the Bluegrass, that there was a couple that came in from England, and they were visiting Canada, and they had a drive and got caught in the middle of something. They turned the wrong way and got into the United States, and they were captured immediately, and they've been treated. I know you haven't read about this. It just caught my eye a day or two ago, and they were caught in the middle, and they put their baby and the whole family in some kind of a cell that was, I think it was cold. It was called, what was the name? I think you mentioned the word for me.
Well, there is a detention center at the southern border. I don't know about the northern border, but there is a detention center in the southern border, and it's been given the nickname as the fridge for people who have passed through there, because it's cold and they don't provide you with a blanket. They just provide you with some type of
right. And they were talking about the baby was cold, and it just I was thinking about it. We don't realize, I mean, this isn't just happening to immigrants, it's happening to other people as well, getting stuck in the middle of everything. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the cases that you represent, something a little personal so our viewers could kind of understand what really is happening, and then we could talk about how they can get documented and everything else that we need to know.
Sure. Well, we, like I mentioned before, we focus on family-based residency. That's where a citizen or resident wants to petition their relative in order to come over. We had a case earlier this summer. A citizen of the U.S. had his wife and son in Italy, and he went to the U.S. Embassy in Italy and asked them how he can bring his family over. And unfortunately, they didn't give him all the correct information. He came into the U.S. because he had to work, and he figured being in the U.S. was going to speed up the process to bring his family over. He ended up finding us, and we were able to help him reunite with his family, with his 2-year-old.
How did you do that? When you said that he went to the embassy, the Italian embassy?
The U.S. Embassy in Italy.
Okay, the U.S. Embassy in Italy, and they couldn't do what you guys did. How did you end up being able to do that for them? the legal aid, North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic in Highland Park was able to do that, and the embassy, U.S. Embassy, wasn't able to do that. What did you do that was different? How did you were able to get the family back here?
Yeah, well, because we know the process well and we can give them legal advice, we were able to guide them through the whole process. And at the embassy, they just gave them general information and not a lot of particular information that was important. For example, the wait times. They just told them, fill out this form, pay this much, and then eventually they'll get an interview. But there's a lot of other steps that go in between.
Can you guide us? Give us a guide.
Sure.
Is you're the, you're sort of the maven of this, and I don't know anything about it. And if, I did have a friend who was deported back to a very good friend of mine who was a violinist, amazing violinist, and was sent back to Germany because of his status. And I would really like to know some of the guidelines, that I could possibly refer somebody to and have some knowledge, because most of us don't have the knowledge. We have no idea what to do. If somebody came to me, I mean, I'm glad I found you through the director of our library. I didn't even know that your clinic existed, and I live in the same area. So many of us don't even know that you're there. So give us some guidelines of how you would be able to do this.
Well, in this particular case that I mentioned, the first step is submitting the petition for your relative. There's a $535 processing fee.
How much is that?
$535.
$535? Okay.
And
that goes to start the ball rolling?
To process the petition.
Okay. And the money goes to?
The petition is processed by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services.
Okay.
And so they will process the case. That may take somewhere around 7 months. Once they approve the case, they'll send it to the National Visa Center because these relatives were trying to immigrate into the country. They needed that immigrant visa. Maybe it'll take a couple months for them to exchange the case. Once it's at the National Visa Center, there are a couple of fees that you have to pay. Affidavit of support form that you need to submit to show that the intending immigrant is not going to be a public charge. Send in civil documents, do a background check. You go to your interview, you go over everything that was in the application. And if you're approved, you get your visa. You come in, and then you're a lawful permanent resident. It just means it's a lawful status in the country.
And they couldn't do that in Italy, in the U.S. Embassy, to give them direction like that?
Unfortunately, they did not. And this is a process that took about a year. Okay. So if he was going to depend on the embassy to give him all this information, you can imagine he was going to be stuck in Italy for a year, going back and forth with them.
And so how he came back within, how long did he come back?
The whole process took maybe about a year. This individual came to us in the summer, and then just the summer last year, and just this summer, his family was finally able to immigrate.
Yeah, because years ago they used to come through, immigrants used to come through, and my grandparents came through Ellis Island, and all they had was they had I don't even know if they had a passport. They had something. They had papers, and there was always somebody that, somebody in the country, like in Chicago, if they came into Chicago, or they had to come through New York, because Ellis Island was in New York, and they had a paper that somebody was going to sponsor them, and that's all they really needed, and they got through. And I think the whole thing was just getting to Ellis Island, and,
Exactly. Yeah, the immigration laws back then were a lot less restrictive. Basically, what you explained, you show up at Ellis Island and you get processed and you get let in. And then after that, the immigration laws largely changed where you kind of need a connection to the country. You need that relative to petition you or an employer.
So why don't people come in that way instead of why don't they do that? People do it more legally, and then they don't have the problems. They do it legally. They get sponsored either by an employer, they get sponsored by a university if they're going to university, or they get sponsored by a family member. Say in the United States, everybody seems to have a family member in our country. And why don't they do it that way? Even if it's a year or a couple of years, why don't they do it that way? Because once you come in illegally, there's so much that you have to be afraid all the time that somebody's, watching, get deported. You end up, in a prison type thing, like, even if it's not a complete type of prison, like a fridge type of thing. Why did they do that? Why don't they just? What is your feeling about this?
Yeah, well, there could be many reasons. First one could be just because they don't have that connection to the country. Maybe they don't have that relative or an employer. And even when an employer wants to petition you, you need to meet certain educational or skills requirements. The relative, if it's going to be a sibling that's going to petition you or a citizen and you're already an adult, we already mentioned the long wait times. For someone from Mexico, it's going to be 20 years, 20 years plus.
But Mexico's 20 years, but then I think we talked about a little earlier, was it? England is what?
That one in the same category as Mexico, that's going to take maybe 20 years. Right now, it might be around 6 years.
So that's half, from England, it's like half the time.
Like 1/3 the time.
1/3 of the time.
Yeah.
And why is that? You're our closest neighbors, which is about 3.5, 4 hours away.
Yeah, it's just the amount of people that are trying to immigrate from Mexico. There's a higher volume of people trying to immigrate from Mexico than England. So the government tries to balance that out.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's a large part of the problem of why people immigrate, because they want to be reunited with their family. They can't wait that long. Other reasons why people come in undocumented, because the process is so complicated. It's expensive. This case that I mentioned earlier about the citizen who petitioned his family from Italy, one of those cases may be around $2,000 roughly, and that's without paying an attorney. That's just filing fees.
That's a lot of money.
Right, and that might not be so much for somebody here, but when you convert it to a local currency of someone living abroad, that could be their half a year's wage, right? So having that connection to the country that will allow you to get into the process of immigrating, the cost, how complicated the process is, those are all obstacles that could maybe motivate someone to come in and document. Another reason too, and we see this a lot more recently, is people are coming from areas that are experiencing a lot of conflict. That's where there's been an uptick in asylum applications. And asylum law has become very restrictive recently. And before, all you had to do is present yourself to someone at the border to plead your case. And now they're not really letting those people come in. And now you have camps of people who are fleeing gang violence, other issues like domestic violence, and you're keeping them in these tent cities at the border without the opportunity to get that legal representation.
Yeah, that's pretty hard. If you're sometimes getting stuck at the border in these holding places are worse than what's going on in their own country. They're fleeing from something. They're going from the frying pan into the fire, basically, because there could be, they're getting treated, like you said, in frigid type tents that don't have blankets, they don't have, toilets, and all kinds of things that are going on. Maybe the right food, the right medical care. I would think that maybe some of these people, if we could only get to these countries before people start fleeing out of it, and maybe not only just the United States, but the United Nations, they should all come forward and help these countries out. So these people can't, they can live a good life in their own country and be safe there. We need to help these people before they flee their country.
Right.
Because the holding places are I mean, I heard about these, I at first, I thought, because there's so many politics here, you don't know what to believe and what not to believe. And I heard this happening to some British citizens, and they're in a holding facility and stuff like that with a little baby. It's very it just tears out your heart.
Yeah, it's a very complicated situation, immigration as a whole. These countries that people are fleeing from, they do need that assistance, right, to prop up their government and help fight corruption and violence. But people aren't only fleeing because of that. There are also natural disasters, right? But it's a complicated situation that requires a lot of thought, a lot of planning, and not simple talking points, right?
And so your job, you have a big job at your clinic, and because there's requirements to naturalize. What made you get involved in the nonprofit immigration work?
Well, I myself am a son of Mexican immigrants. My parents came from Apaseo del Alto, Guanajuato.
Mexico?
Yes. And although both of them have naturalized as U.S. citizens many years ago, growing up I was very conscious of the obstacles that an immigrant can face in this country. So growing up, I felt, because I shared a culture with immigrants and I could speak the language, I kind of felt a sense of obligation to help those people that resembled my family.
Yeah, and people that maybe had helped your parents.
Exactly.
But in those days it wasn't as complicated as it is now. But you see a lot of your people being really, hurt, and they don't know what to do, and now this legal aid clinic. Are you going to continue when you get your law degree? Are you going to go into a firm that represents immigrants? Are you going to stay in a clinic type, or give your self certain days a week at clinic and pro bono? What are your thoughts? As pretty soon you'll be an attorney in about 2 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully. If everything goes as planned. Yeah, I really like doing nonprofit work and helping those that really need help. Being able to afford an attorney is it's put someone in a great position to help themselves, and I like to help those individuals that might not be able to help to afford that attorney, right? So I would definitely like to stay in the nonprofit sector and stay at the legal aid clinic for many years. That's my plan.
That's good, because some of the attorneys in these private law firms, I mean, a cousin of mine, she lost her husband, and I gave her a lawyer, and she just charges her thousands of dollars continuously, and she is, she's a single mom with a child with a disability, and it's very, hard,
Exactly, and that's the kind of people that we want to help. We also help people from who are victims of domestic violence. There's a lot of intersection between our domestic violence practice and immigration law practice. We'll have individuals who are victims of domestic violence and go see a domestic violence attorney at our clinic to get an order of protection so they can flee that situation, the abuse.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to be doing that in our show too. That's going to be one of our shows on domestic violence.
Absolutely. It's a very important topic.
Yes.
And so we might help someone with an order of protection, and then that person might be undocumented. And maybe we can help them really obtain some type of relief because of that victimization.
And do they get therapy? Do some of these people require some kind of like therapy, psychological therapy for.
Yeah, domestic
I mean,
violence, domestic abuse.
even trying to get into the country puts a lot of stress. And it isn't just we're talking. I mean, because you're here not because of domestic violence today, but you're here because of people trying to get into, legal documentation, and that puts a lot of stress on the person as well and the families.
It does, yeah. A lot of our clients are coming from areas of conflict, and they've seen very harsh things. I had someone whose father was hacked to death with a machete in a Central American country. So she was trying to flee that situation, protect herself. So you have instances like that. And you also have people who are living under this constant anxiety that they themselves might be picked up by immigration authorities. There's constantly talks of immigration raids. Or maybe not even the undocumented individual is going through that anxiety. It could be relatives, children who know that their parents are not here documented and living with that constant fear of the parents going to be home when they come home from school.
Yeah, that's very difficult for children, and that has happened too, where children came home from school and the parents were already picked up, and that must be very traumatic for a child. So when that happens, does your clinic provide any resources for these children of the families that are left behind?
We have partnerships with other organizations that might be better equipped to handle that kind of situation.
But to refer, you have good referrals. And we just have a little time left, but what is the most gratifying part of your job?
It's
you have 2 minutes.
It's helping people. Maybe someone escaping a domestic violence situation and being able to get lawful status finally after so many years, and not having their undocumented status used as a weapon against them by their abusive spouse or partner. Helping people reunite with their families. Someone who hasn't seen their son or daughter in so long, or petitioning their spouse. Right? That's very gratifying work.
That must be very gratifying to you when you've worked so many hours, and finally it comes to fruition that you're seeing the results of all the work you have done. That must be extremely gratifying.
It is. It's a very special feeling when a client comes in with their family members and we're meeting them for the first time.
And that must be very, how is that? That must be really inspiring.
Oh, it is. It's a constant reminder of why this work that we do is important, and why I'm doing this kind of work. This is what motivates me the most.
I could see where it can be really rewarding, because a lot of lawyers really never see, maybe they get money for their clients or something, but to see a family get reunited, I mean, that must be so beautiful, and so warm, and, I would see a lot of cheers, happy cheers.
Oh, yeah. That is something that happens frequently.
And how many, we still have a minute or so, how many lawyers are at your clinic? How many people, is it a small clinic, big clinic?
We have 4 attorneys, and 3 of those attorneys are practicing attorneys. We also have volunteer attorneys that help us with the various cases.
I'd like to invite you back on the show because there's so much more. We're just hitting lightly on everything, so we can learn more things that you must do. Besides, I'm sure you have a lot of work between the work that you do, you're in law school, and there's a lot on your plate. And I want to thank you for being on our show and to inform our viewers what immigration is really about, and not just to see these little clips that that you see on other news stations, but really what really is immigration and why it's so important, the work that you do. Again, I want to thank the legal aid, North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic, for all the work.